Jake had been working as a forest ranger for 12 long years. Every single day he walked the same paths through the tall redwood trees. He knew every rock, every fallen log, and every animal trail by heart. But on this particular evening in October, something was different. The sun was setting behind the giant trees, painting everything in orange and red colors. Jake was doing his usual evening patrol when he heard something strange. It was soft crying, like someone was in pain. The sound was coming from deep inside the forest, from a part he rarely visited. At first, Jake thought it might be an injured hiker. People sometimes got lost in these woods, especially when it started getting dark. He grabbed his flashlight and first aid kit, then followed the sound deeper into the forest. The crying led him through thick bushes and around massive tree trunks. His boots crunched on the fallen leaves as he pushed through branches that seemed to grab at his ranger uniform. The sound got clearer as he walked. It definitely sounded like a woman, but there was something unusual about it. After walking for about 20 minutes, Jake found himself in a clearing he had never seen before. This was impossible. He had mapped every inch of this forest over the years. He knew there was no clearing in this area. Yet here he was, standing in an open space, surrounded by the biggest redwood trees he had ever seen. In the middle of the clearing stood one enormous tree. Its trunk was so wide that 10 people holding hands couldn't wrap around it. But what made Jake's heart skip a beat were the strange marks burned into the bark. They looked like some kind of symbols or patterns, definitely not natural. And then he saw her. Chained to the base of this giant tree was a woman, but she was unlike anyone Jake had ever seen. Her skin seemed to glow with a soft, silvery light that changed to pale blue when the moonlight hit it. She was tall and thin, with arms and legs that seemed longer than they should be. Her fingers ended in what looked like clear crystal nails. But it was her eyes that really shocked Jake. They were huge and had many surfaces like a fly's eyes, but beautiful. They reflected the forest around them in colors that shouldn't exist. When she looked up at him, those incredible eyes were filled with fear and hope at the same time. The chains holding her were unlike anything Jake had seen in his life. They looked like they were made of the same clear material as her nails, but dark and heavy. They seemed to suck in the light around them instead of reflecting it. Jake stood there for a moment, his mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His training told him to radio for backup, to follow proper procedures. But his heart told him something different. Here was someone in trouble, someone who needed help. It didn't matter that she looked different or that this situation was beyond anything he could explain. He took a slow step forward, keeping his hands where she could see them. The woman tensed up, pressing herself against the tree trunk. Jake could see she was scared of him, probably thinking he might hurt her like whoever had chained her up. "Hey, it's okay," Jake said softly, the way he would talk to a frightened animal. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help." She tilted, her head at the sound of his voice, those amazing eyes studying his face. She probably couldn't understand his words, but maybe she could hear the kindness in his tone. Jake knelt down a few feet away from her and set his flashlight on the ground so it lit up the area without blinding her. He pulled out his water bottle and some energy bars from his pack, placing them on the ground between them. Then he slowly backed away to show he meant no harm. The woman watched every move he made. After a few minutes, she reached out with one of those long, graceful arms and touched the water bottle. Her crystal fingertips made a soft tinkling sound against the plastic. She brought it to her lips and took a small sip, then drank more eagerly. While she drank, Jake studied the chains more closely. They weren't locked with any kind of key or mechanism he recognized. Instead, they seemed to be held together by some kind of energy or force. When he reached out to touch one, it felt warm and seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The woman made a soft sound, almost like singing, and pointed to different spots on the chains. Jake realized she was trying to show him something, maybe how to remove them. He pressed where she indicated and felt the chain respond, becoming slightly looser. It took Jake almost 3 hours to figure out how to remove all the chains. It was like solving a puzzle that required not just the right pressure, but the right rhythm and timing. The woman helped as much as she could, making those musical sounds whenever he did something right. When the last chain finally fell away, she collapsed against the tree trunk, clearly exhausted. But instead of coming toward Jake, she tried to move away from him. She was still afraid, still not sure if she could trust him completely. Jake didn't try to get closer. Instead, he sat down where he was and waited. Slowly, the woman's fear seemed to fade. She drank more water and even tried one of the energy bars, making a face at the taste but eating it anyway because she was so hungry. As the night went on, Jake found himself understanding her without words. She pointed to the burned marks on the tree, then up at the sky, her face showing anger and sadness. Someone had left her here, probably as some kind of punishment. When the first light of dawn started to appear through the trees, the woman became restless. She kept looking at the sky and making urgent gestures. Jake understood that she needed to leave before it got too bright. Before she left, she came closer to Jake than she had all night. She reached into what looked like a pocket in her strange, shimmering clothes and pulled out a small stone. It was smooth and warm, and it seemed to glow with its own soft light. She pressed the stone into Jake's palm, wrapping his fingers around it gently. Her crystal nails were surprisingly warm against his skin. Then she did something that made his heart skip a beat. She placed her other hand over her chest, right where her heart would be, then pointed to him. Even though they couldn't speak the same language, Jake understood perfectly. She was saying thank you, not just for freeing her, but for showing her kindness when she was helpless and afraid. The woman backed away toward the edge of the clearing, moving so gracefully she barely seemed to touch the ground. Just before she disappeared into the forest, she turned back one more time. Those incredible eyes met his, and Jake saw something in them he would never forget: gratitude, but also a promise that this wasn't goodbye forever. Then she was gone, vanishing into the trees like she had never been there at all. Jake sat alone in the clearing as the sun came up, holding the warm stone in his hand and wondering if he had just experienced the most important moment of his entire life. Jake walked back to his ranger station in a daze, the glowing stone still warm in his pocket. The sun was fully up now and everything looked normal again. Birds were singing, squirrels were running up trees, and the forest seemed just like it, always had. But Jake knew his life had changed forever. He sat at his desk, staring at the paperwork he was supposed to fill out about his patrol. How could he possibly write a report about what had really happened? Who would believe him? He could already imagine his boss reading it and sending him straight to a doctor. Instead, Jake wrote the most boring report he had ever written. Evening patrol completed, no incidents, all areas secure. It felt like lying. But what choice did he have? For the next 3 days, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the forest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those incredible rainbow eyes looking at him with such gratitude. He kept touching the stone in his pocket, making sure it was still there, that the whole thing hadn't been some crazy dream. The stone was his only proof that it had really happened. During the day, it looked like an ordinary smooth rock, maybe, a little prettier than most. But at night, in complete darkness, it glowed with that same soft light he remembered. Sometimes Jake thought he could see patterns in the glow, like star maps or mathematical equations, but they disappeared the moment he tried to focus on them. Jake found himself returning to the clearing every day after work, but no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find any trace of what had happened there. The chains were gone, the burn marks on the tree had faded to barely visible scars, and the clearing itself seemed smaller somehow, more ordinary. By the 4th day, Jake was starting to doubt his own memory. Maybe he had been more stressed than he thought. His divorce had been finalized just 2 months ago, and his dad had passed away in the spring. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him, creating something impossible to help him cope with all the changes in his life. But then he would take out the stone, and it would be warm in his hand, and he would know that something real had happened in that forest. On the 5th evening, Jake was finishing up some paperwork at the ranger station when he noticed a soft glow outside his window. His heart started beating fast as he looked up from his desk. Could it be? He stepped outside onto the small porch of the station and looked toward the forest. There, at the edge of the clearing where he parked his truck, stood the woman from the forest, but she looked completely different now. Gone was the weakness and fear he had seen before. She stood tall and confident, her skin glowing brighter than before. She wore what looked like a flowing garment that changed colors as she moved, shifting from deep blue to silver to purple like oil on water. Her long hair seemed to float around her shoulders as if she were underwater. In her hands, she carried something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was about the size of a book, but it looked like it was made of crystallized starlight. The object was clear, but filled with swirling patterns of light that moved and changed as he watched. The woman walked toward him without any of the fear she had shown before. Those amazing eyes were focused directly on his face, and Jake could see something in them that made his chest feel warm. She was happy to see him. When she reached the porch steps, she stopped and gestured for Jake to hold out his hands. He did, and she carefully placed the crystal object into his palms. The moment it touched his skin, Jake felt a surge of warmth spread up his arms and through his whole body. It wasn't painful, but it was powerful, like being filled with energy and knowledge at the same time. The crystal device seemed to come alive in his hands. Suddenly, images appeared in the air above it, like a hologram, but more real somehow. Jake saw pictures of star systems with planets circling around bright suns. He saw mathematical formulas that his mind somehow understood even though he had never been good at math. He saw what looked like historical records, showing tall, graceful beings like the woman in front of him living in cities that seemed to be made of light and crystal. The woman watched his amazement with what Jake could only describe as joy. She pointed to herself, then to the device, then to Jake. Even without words, her meaning was crystal clear. This was her way of saying thank you for his kindness when she had been helpless and afraid. Jake looked up from the device to meet her eyes. "I don't understand," he said softly. "Why are you giving me this? I just did what anyone would do." She tilted her head at his words, then did something that surprised him. She reached out and gently touched his chest, right over his heart. Then, she touched her own chest in the same place. Her expression told him everything he needed to know. Not everyone would have helped her. Not everyone would have spent 3 hours freeing a stranger, especially one who looked so different. The woman then noticed the stone Jake still carried in his pocket. She pointed to it, and Jake pulled it out. When she touched the stone while he held the crystal device, both objects began to glow brighter. They created a harmony together, a musical note that seemed to make the air itself sing. The sound was beautiful and peaceful, like a lullaby from another world. Jake understood that the stone and the device were connected somehow, that they were meant to work together. The woman had given him the stone as a token of gratitude, and now she was giving him something much more precious. This crystal device was technology beyond anything humans had ever imagined. But more than that, it was a gift of trust. This woman, this being from another world, trusted him enough to share something that was clearly important to her people. She believed in his kindness, in his ability to use this gift wisely, as Jake held both objects, feeling their warmth and energy. He realized that this moment was about more than just a thank you gift. It was about two very different beings connecting across impossible differences. It was about choosing to help someone even when you don't understand who they are or where they come from. The woman stepped back and looked at Jake one more time. Her expression conveyed a message he understood perfectly, even without words. She was telling him that their meeting hadn't been an accident, that sometimes the universe brings people together for reasons bigger than either of them can understand. Then, just like before, she began to back away toward the forest. But this time. There was no fear in her movements, no urgency. She moved with the grace of someone who knew she was safe, who had found a friend in an unexpected place. Just before she disappeared into the trees, she raised one hand in what was clearly a goodbye gesture. Jake raised his own hand in response, still holding the crystal device in the other. As she vanished into the forest, Jake felt a sense of completion, like a circle had been closed. He stood on his porch for a long time after she was gone, holding the two gifts and watching the stars come out. Somewhere up there was her home, her people, her world. And somehow, through simple human kindness, he had become connected to it all. Jake woke up the next morning feeling like he was living in two different worlds. In one world, he was just a regular forest ranger who went to work, filled out reports, and helped lost hikers. In the other world, he had befriended an alien woman and received technology that could change everything humans knew about the universe. The crystal device sat on his kitchen table, looking perfectly ordinary in the morning sunlight. If Jake didn't know better, he might think it was just an expensive paperweight. But he knew what he had seen the night before. The holographic images, the star maps, the feeling of knowledge flowing into his mind, all of it had been real. Still, doubt crept in as Jake got ready for work. Human minds weren't built to handle experiences like this. Maybe he was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress of his divorce and his father's death had finally caught up with him in the worst possible way. At work, Jake tried to act normal, but everything felt different. His fellow ranger, Tom, noticed right away that something was wrong. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," Tom said, pouring himself coffee in the break room. "Everything okay at home?" Jake wanted to tell his friend everything. Tom was a good guy, someone Jake had worked with for 5 years. They had helped each other through tough times before. But how could he possibly explain what had happened without sounding completely crazy? "Just tired," Jake said instead. "Haven't been sleeping well lately." Tom studied his face with concern. "Maybe you should take some time off. You've been through a lot this year with your dad passing and the divorce. Nobody would blame you for needing a break." The suggestion stung because part of Jake wondered if Tom was right. Maybe he did need professional help. Maybe what he thought had happened was actually his mind's way of coping with grief and stress. During his patrol that day, Jake found himself constantly touching the stone in his pocket, making sure it was still there. He also kept checking his phone, looking at the photos he had taken of the crystal device. In the daylight, even the photos looked strange and unclear, like his camera hadn't been able to properly capture what he was seeing. Jake spent his lunch break researching on his phone. He looked up everything he could find about UFO sightings, alien encounters, and unexplained phenomena in the area. He found plenty of stories, but most of them sounded nothing like his experience. People talked about being taken aboard spaceships or seeing lights in the sky, but nobody described meeting someone like the woman he had helped. The local Native American history was more interesting. The tribes that had lived in these forests for thousands of years had stories about star people who would sometimes visit Earth. These beings were described as tall, graceful, and wise, bringing gifts of knowledge to humans who showed them kindness. Jake's heart beat faster as he read these stories. They sounded remarkably similar to his own experience. But even finding these historical accounts didn't make Jake feel better. Anyone could read the same stories online. Maybe his stressed brain had just used these old legends to create a vivid hallucination. The worst part was not being able to talk to anyone about it. Jake had always been the kind of person who worked through problems by talking them out with friends or family. But this was too big, too unbelievable. He imagined trying to explain it to his ex-wife Lisa, or to his sister Jenny, or to his boss, Mr. Peterson. They would all react the same way, with concern for his mental health. That evening, Jake sat in his living room with the crystal device in his hands. In the darkness, it began to glow again, just like the night before. The swirling patterns of light inside became more active, and once again, Jake saw images forming in the air above it. This time, the images seemed different. Instead of star, maps, and mathematical formulas, Jake saw what looked like Earth, but from space. He watched as the view zoomed in, showing different parts of the planet. He saw forests and oceans, cities and wilderness areas. Then the view focused on his own forest, his own ranger station. Jake realized he was seeing Earth through the eyes of the woman's people. They were watching, observing, perhaps protecting the planet in ways humans didn't even know about. The woman he had helped wasn't just a random visitor, she was part of something much bigger. But even this amazing revelation couldn't completely push away Jake's doubts. The human brain was incredibly good at creating elaborate fantasies. Maybe he was just seeing what he wanted to see in the patterns of light. Jake's sleep became restless and filled with strange dreams. He dreamed of flying through space, of crystal, cities on distant planets, of beings like the woman he had met living in harmony with technologies that seemed like magic. Sometimes he woke up feeling energized and excited, like he had been given a glimpse of humanity's future. Other times he woke up exhausted and confused, wondering if he was losing his grip on reality. At work, his performance began to suffer. Jake found himself distracted during routine tasks, staring off into space when he should have been paying attention to hikers or checking trail conditions. Tom and the other rangers started giving him worried looks. His boss, Mr. Peterson, called him into the office on Friday afternoon. "Jake, I'm concerned about you," the older man said, leaning back in his chair. "You've been one of our best rangers for years, but lately you seem distant. Is there something going on that we should talk about?" Jake sat there for a moment, staring at his hands. Part of him wanted to tell Mr. Peterson everything. Another part of him knew that would be the end of his career. "I've just been dealing with some personal stuff," Jake said finally. "I know. I haven't been at my best lately. I'm working on it." Mr. Peterson nodded sympathetically. "Look, why don't you take a long weekend? Get some rest, clear your head, and if you need to talk to someone, a counselor or therapist, the department. Insurance covers that. There's no shame in getting help when you need it." Jake agreed to take the weekend off, but he knew rest wouldn't solve his problem. He was caught between two realities, and he couldn't figure out which one was real. That night, as Jake held both the stone and the crystal device, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living in this state of doubt and confusion. He needed to find out the truth, even if it meant discovering that he was having a mental breakdown. He decided to return to the clearing where he had first met the woman. If she was real, if any of this was real, maybe she would come back. Maybe she could help him understand what was happening to him. If she didn't come back, if he found nothing but empty forest, then Jake would know it was time to get professional help. Either way, he couldn't keep living in this uncertain space between two worlds. As Jake prepared for what might be the most important night of his life, he felt a mixture of hope and fear. Tomorrow, one way or another, he would know the truth about what had happened to him in the forest. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. He packed water and snacks, grabbed his flashlight, and put both the stone and crystal device in his backpack. Whatever happened next, Jake was ready to face it head on. Saturday evening came faster than Jake expected. All day he had been nervous and excited at the same time. By sunset, he was walking through the forest toward the clearing where everything had started. His backpack felt heavy with the stone and crystal device inside, but his heart felt even heavier with hope and fear. The forest seemed different as Jake walked the familiar paths. Every shadow looked deeper. Every sound seemed louder. His flashlight beam danced across the trees as he made his way deeper into the woods. Part of him wondered if he would even be able to find the clearing again. Maybe it had been a dream location that only existed in his stressed mind. But as Jake pushed through the last line of bushes, there it was. The clearing looked exactly like he remembered, with the massive redwood tree standing in the center like an ancient guardian. The burn marks on its trunk were still visible, faint but real. Jake's heart jumped with relief. At least the place was real. Jake set up a small camp at the edge of the clearing. He spread out a blanket, unpacked some snacks and water, and settled in to wait. He had no idea if the woman would come back or when, or even if she was still on Earth. For all he knew, she had returned to her home among the stars days ago. Hours passed slowly. Jake tried to stay alert, but the peaceful sounds of the night forest were making him drowsy. Owls hooted in the distance, and small animals rustled through the undergrowth. The moon was bright overhead, casting silver light through the canopy of leaves. It was almost midnight when Jake saw the first hint of that familiar glow. At first, he thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. But then the light grew stronger, and his heart started beating fast with excitement and nervousness. She emerged from the forest like something from a beautiful dream. But this time, the woman looked completely different from both of their previous meetings. Her skin glowed brighter than ever, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. She wore what looked like a flowing robe made of starlight itself, shifting and shimmering with every step. What really took Jake's breath away was her confidence. During their first meeting, she had been weak and frightened. During their second meeting, she had been grateful but cautious. Now she moved like someone who belonged in this forest, like someone who had every right to be here. In her arms, she carried something that made Jake's eyes widen with wonder. It was larger than the crystal device she had given him before, about the size of a small suitcase, but it seemed to weigh nothing in her hands. The object looked like it was made of the same crystallized light, but it was more complex, with layers and chambers that seemed to go deeper than should be possible. The woman walked directly to Jake without any hesitation. Those incredible rainbow eyes met his, and Jake saw something in them that made his chest warm with emotion. She was happy to see him, genuinely pleased that he had returned. When she reached his little campsite, she gestured for Jake to stand up. He did, and she carefully placed the large crystal object on his blanket. Then she stepped back and began to make gestures that Jake somehow understood perfectly. She pointed to the object, then to Jake, then to the forest around them. She was showing him that this gift was connected to the earth, to the natural world, that he spent his life protecting. This wasn't just advanced technology. It was something specifically meant to help him in his work as a guardian of the forest. Jake knelt down beside the crystal object and reached out to touch it. The moment his fingers made contact, the device came alive with light and energy. Images appeared in the air above it, but these were different from anything he had seen before. Jake saw the forest as it really was, not just the trees and animals that humans could observe, but the hidden connections between everything. He saw energy flowing between plants, communication networks that trees used to share nutrients and warnings, the complex relationships between every living thing in the ecosystem. The woman knelt down beside him and touched the device as well. Suddenly, Jake could see even more. He saw the forest's health displayed like a medical chart, showing which areas were thriving and which were struggling. He saw pollution sources that were invisible to human eyes, disease patterns in wildlife, populations and weather changes that wouldn't be obvious for weeks or months. But the most amazing thing was that Jake could understand it all. Somehow, the device was translating complex environmental data into knowledge that his human mind could grasp and use. He was seeing his forest through the eyes of beings who had been studying and protecting planets for thousands of years. The Woman then pulled out Jake's original gifts, the stone and the smaller crystal device. When she placed them near the new object, all three began to resonate together, creating that beautiful harmonic sound he remembered. But now Jake understood what the sound meant. It was the frequency of life itself, the vibration that connected all living things across the universe. Jake looked up at the woman with tears in his eyes. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why are you giving me all this? What did I do to deserve something so incredible?" She couldn't understand his words, but she seemed to understand his question. She reached out and gently touched his face, then pointed to her heart, then to his. Her expression was so full of warmth and kindness that Jake felt like he might cry. Then she did something that surprised him. She stood up and walked to the big redwood tree in the center of the clearing. She placed both hands on its trunk and closed her eyes. Immediately, the tree began to glow with the same soft light as her skin. The glow spread to other trees around the clearing, then further into the forest. Jake realized he was watching something incredible. The woman was communicating with the forest itself, introducing him as a friend and ally. She was telling the trees and plants and animals that Jake could be trusted, that he was someone who would use these gifts to help and protect them. When she returned to Jake's side, she gestured to the crystal devices, then to the glowing forest around them. Her meaning was clear. These tools weren't just gifts. They were a responsibility. She was trusting Jake to use them to protect the natural world in ways that no human had ever been able to before. Jake carefully packed the three crystal objects in his backpack, feeling the weight of both the technology and the trust that came with it. When he looked up, the woman was preparing to leave again, but this time, she didn't just walk away. She approached Jake one more time and did something that shocked him. She placed both hands on his shoulders and pressed her forehead gently against his. For a moment, Jake felt a connection that went beyond words or understanding. He felt her gratitude, her hope for humanity, and her confidence that he would use these gifts wisely. When she pulled away, Jake saw something new in her expression. It wasn't goodbye. It was see you later. Somehow, Jake knew that this wasn't their final meeting. The gifts she had given him were just the beginning of a longer relationship between her people and humanity. As she walked back toward the forest, the woman turned one last time and raised her hand. Jake raised his own hand in response, knowing that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't even imagine yet. After she disappeared into the trees, Jake sat in the clearing for a long time, holding his backpack full of alien technology and feeling like the luckiest person who had ever lived. He had been chosen for something amazing, something that would help protect the world he loved. The doubt and confusion of the past week were completely gone. Jake knew exactly what was real and what his purpose was going to be. Jake returned to work on Monday morning feeling like a completely different person. The crystal devices were safely hidden in his apartment, but their effects on him were immediate and amazing. As he walked his usual patrol routes, Jake noticed things he had never seen before in 12 years of ranger work. He could sense which areas of the forest were healthy and which were struggling. Dead trees that looked fine from the outside showed him signs of disease that wouldn't be visible for months. Animal trails revealed stories about migration patterns and population changes that normally took years of scientific study to understand. At first, Jake worried that his new abilities might seem suspicious to his coworkers, but he quickly learned how to present his insights in ways that sounded like normal ranger experience rather than impossible knowledge. When Tom mentioned that several hikers had gotten lost in the south section recently, Jake suggested they check for a possible landslide, blocking the usual trail markers. Sure enough, they found rocks and fallen trees that had made the path confusing. Tom was impressed by Jake's instinct for reading the landscape. Within a week, Jake had identified 3 areas where erosion was going to cause serious problems during the next heavy rain season. His boss, Mr. Peterson, was amazed by the detailed reports Jake provided, complete with specific recommendations for prevention. "I don't know what happened to you over the weekend," Mr. Peterson said, looking over Jake's latest environmental assessment. "But whatever it was, keep it up. This is some of the best analysis work I've seen in 20 years. Jake smiled and said it was just the result of paying closer attention to details. He couldn't exactly explain that he was seeing the forest through alien technology that showed him the health of every living thing within miles. The most incredible discovery came when Jake realized the devices weren't just showing him problems, they were teaching him solutions. When he studied the crystal displays at night, he learned about natural techniques for soil restoration, ways to encourage wildlife population recovery, and methods for preventing forest fires that human science hadn't discovered yet. Jake started implementing these techniques during his regular work, always making sure to present them as ideas he had read about or learned from other rangers. The results were so impressive that word began to spread throughout the state park system. A month after receiving the larger crystal device, Jake was invited to speak at a conference for forest managers. He shared what he called integrated ecosystem observation techniques, carefully avoiding any mention of where the knowledge really came from. The audience was fascinated by his insights into forest health monitoring and natural restoration methods. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a forest ecology professor from the State University, approached Jake after his presentation. "Your observations about tree communication networks are remarkably advanced," she said. "Some of what you described aligns with research that's just beginning to be published. How did you develop these techniques?" Jake had prepared for questions like this. "I spend a lot of time just watching and listening in the forest," he said. "Sometimes the trees tell you things if you know how to pay attention." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Would you be interested in collaborating on some research projects? We could use someone with your field experience and observational skills." Jake agreed, knowing that working with scientists would help him understand his alien gifts even better. It would also give him a way to share the knowledge more widely without revealing its true source. Over the next 6 months, Jake's life transformed completely. His collaboration with Dr. Chen led to several published papers on forest health assessment techniques. His own forest district became a model for other parks across the country. Wildlife populations that had been declining for years began to recover under his care. But the most meaningful changes were more personal. Jake found himself sleeping better than he had in years. The constant worry and stress that had plagued him since his father's death and divorce seemed to melt away. He felt like he had found his true purpose in life. The crystal devices revealed new capabilities almost every week. Jake learned to predict weather patterns days in advance, allowing him to prepare for storms before weather services even detected them. He developed an almost supernatural ability to locate lost hikers, following energy trails that the devices showed him. One evening in late spring, Jake was using the devices to monitor a family of bears that had recently moved into his district. He wanted to make sure they had enough food sources and weren't coming too close to camping areas. As he watched the crystal displays, he noticed something unusual. There were other energy signatures in the forest, ones that didn't match any known animals or natural phenomena. Jake studied the patterns more carefully and realized what he was seeing. There were others like the woman he had met, not many but a few, moving through forests around the world. Jake understood that his experience hadn't been unique. The woman's people were quietly working to protect natural environments across the planet, probably had been for a very long time. His encounter with her had made him part of a much larger effort to preserve Earth's ecosystems. This realization filled Jake with both pride and responsibility. He wasn't just a forest ranger anymore. He was a guardian appointed by beings who understood the planet better than humanity ever had. Jake started documenting everything he learned from the crystal devices, creating detailed guides for forest restoration and wildlife protection. He was careful to write them in scientific language, presenting the information as the result of long-term field observation rather than alien technology. Through Dr. Chen's university connections, Jake's techniques began to spread to other countries. Forest managers in Brazil started using his fire prevention methods. Wildlife specialists in Africa adapted his population monitoring techniques. Conservation workers in Asia implemented his soil restoration processes. Jake realized that the woman's gift was having a global impact, helping to protect forests and wildlife far beyond his own ranger district. The knowledge she had shared with one human was slowly spreading to help the entire planet. A year after their final meeting, Jake returned to the clearing where it all began. He brought updates on everything he had accomplished, speaking aloud, to the empty forest as if the woman might be listening from somewhere among the stars. "The techniques you showed me have helped protect over 2 million acres of forest," Jake said to the night air. "Wildlife populations are recovering in 12 different states. Other countries are starting to use these methods too." As Jake spoke, the 3 crystal devices in his backpack began to glow softly. He pulled them out and set them on the ground, watching as they resonated with that familiar harmonic frequency. For a moment, Jake felt the same connection he had experienced when the woman touched his forehead. A sense of approval and encouragement from far away. Jake understood that this was how it was supposed to work. The woman's people didn't want to interfere directly with human development. Instead, they chose individuals who showed kindness and compassion, giving them tools to help protect the planet in their own way. Looking up at the stars through the forest canopy, Jake felt grateful for the chain of events that had led him to this moment. A simple act of kindness toward a stranger had opened up possibilities he never could have imagined. Jake packed up his crystal devices and headed home, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to use his gifts for the good of the forest and all the creatures who called it home. He had found his calling, and it was more meaningful than anything he had ever dreamed possible. The woman had given him more than advanced technology. She had given him a chance to make a real difference in the world. And Jake intended to spend the rest of his life proving that her trust in humanity had been well placed.